Starting a live stream.
Awesome.
Look at those numbers tick up.
Like, good job, everyone. This is new for us too. So the fact that you are going from talk to talk to talk and actually arriving at the correct spot, like kudos to you. You're doing wonderful. You're doing great. We will start in about 5 minutes. So for 5 minutes, we'll talk about, I don't know, plumbers. What else have we been talking about? Oh, yeah. The human body. Food,
Yes.
body is evolved to
Now
die.
we're all just born to die. That's been the theme today.
We've all been born to die. That's new. A new twist. Yeah, we'll just continue that conversation. Jonathan, you live in Kentucky, is that right? Born and raised, or
Born and raised, yeah.
born and raised. Nice.
The accent doesn't give it away at all.
I kind of assumed, but you never know. You never know.
Cryo freezing. Snake oil.
Snake oil?
Real tangible thing.
Well, technically,
Walt
it is
Disney
a real
coming back
thing,
to life.
because you can't be cryogenically frozen. But I mean, does it preserve anything?
It's the unthawing part we have a problem.
The problem,
Thawing part
yeah.
issues with.
But I don't think we've thawed anybody who is still, we don't think we've frozen anybody who's still living and then unfrozen to find out. But at least not in real life.
I volunteer as
we've
tribute.
we've had Demolition Man.
We've had Idiocracy,
Encino Man.
Encino Man. What was that movie? Forever Young with Mel Gibson. I don't know if anyone saw that.
Was that a cryo movie?
Yeah,
it was.
Cryo.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. I cried every time
that.
one.
I cried every time. That's not what we meant.
No, seriously, does anyone have an interest in living like being frozen and then being unfrozen years later? I feel like that sounds like a nightmare to me.
As discussed earlier, I do want to live forever. So, I mean,
Okay, anyone but
There's a
Jason.
song about that. Is it Bon Jovi? I don't want to live forever.
I'm on the constant search for vampires.
Like a Nicholas
So-
Cage.
Ah,
Yeah, Nick Cage is definitely a vampire. For sure. All right. We got 3 minutes, everyone.
I'm forgetting a movie. I forget which movie.
I'm forgetting which movie I'm forgetting.
Yeah. Oh, Austin Powers.
Oh, yes. Yes, that's such a quotable.
That's the one.
I haven't seen that in years. It holds up, right?
I don't know. I'm
Oh
now
my
curious if it's going to
Yeah.
hold up.
Be like, we thought this was funny. I don't know. Like Ace Ventura, all those crazy movies. Yeah. What's a movie that does hold up though, from what that you saw maybe growing up and then you watch it as an adult?
Blood in, blood out, bound by honor.
I've never seen that. Weird.
You haven't? Yeah. That's weird.
I know, right? You know me. Huh.
As I'm sitting here in cowboy boots and a cowboy hat talking about
Living forever.
Well, the living forever and gang movies. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, shocker.
I'm going to go with the cliche Empire Strikes Back.
Of course, Star Wars.
Still holds up.
I watched
Compared to most movies of the same time era, that one holds up quite well.
Yes, that one does for sure. Never Ending Story, I watched about 5 years ago, and I was like, this is not great. That's my opinion. I bet a lot of people think differently, but my opinion is it's
You're gonna get flamed now because of that. People are like, "What?"
I'm okay with that. I confidently stand by my opinion. Ugh. Thank you.
I don't know if they hold up, but the two I still enjoy are Princess Bride and
Yes.
Home Alone 2.
Oh, the New York one? Yeah, fantastic. Agreed. Princess Bride is classic for sure. All right, if you are not going to be giving this talk or need to be on screen, go ahead and go backstage. So I'm really just Ryan and Jason.
Fine.
Go backstage.
Kick us out.
Jason Blanchard's.
Bye,
All right,
guys.
bye.
Bye. All right, we'll start in about 30 seconds. We have Jonathan Rogers here. Jonathan, when was the last time you gave a talk?
for you guys back in August at the Blue Team Summit in general at Queen City Con.
Nice.
They had their inaugural a couple weeks ago.
Awesome. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and start. This is Jonathan Rogers. Thank you guys for joining us. He's going to be talking about defense against the snake oil arts, dealing with vendors. All right, take it away.
Thanks, Deb, and welcome everybody to the Snake Oil Summit. Thank you guys so much for taking time to watch the talk today. So, as Deb said, the title of the talk today is Defense Against the Snake Oil Arts, Dealing with Vendors. So, really where this talk comes from for me is when I got into information security, I had some ideas of what information security was going to look like. I had some ideas of what my career should look like and what I was going to have to deal with as an information technologist, or excuse me, information security person. So I thought, oh, I have to deal with vulnerabilities. I'll have to deal with this. I'll have to deal with that. But then I get in and my boss is like, oh yeah, now you've got to deal with vendors, which is not something I'd ever had to do before. And so that was kind of a surprise for me. And I didn't really know how much I was going to have to deal with vendors. And as I've worked through that, I've learned a lot from that. And that's what I really want to talk about and share today. Because what can we really say about vendors? What's a good way? Is there a good quote we can use to describe vendors? Well, I think the author Charles Dickens described vendors best in his first line of his book, A Tale of Two Cities. You remember what he said in that book? He said, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And for a lot of vendors, that's a pretty freaking accurate description, because some vendors are best. They do a really good job. Some vendors, yeah, they're the worst. They're not really so good. Some vendors, they run the gamut. They're everything in between the best and the worst. Maybe they're the best sometimes, maybe they're the worst. And, you know, like I said, everything in between. And some vendors, they're just not very good at all. So when we talk about vendors, when we think about vendors, there's an analogy that I often use when I'm talking to colleagues and people about vendors and how they are, and annoying is definitely a word you can use for them. But some vendors, what are some vendors like? What person can we compare vendors to? Well, the way I like to put it, some vendors are like teenage boys. What do I mean by that? Well, what do teenage boys do? Well, teenage boys meet somebody they like, and what do they start doing? They make promises. So, for example, what do teenage boys, they meet somebody they like, what do they promise? They say, oh, honey, I will buy you a diamond ring. I will buy you a mansion. I'll buy you the car of your dreams. And I'll, after I've given you everything you want, I'll give you the moon. But what can teenage boys often deliver? Well, they go to get the ring and they realize diamonds cost a little more than they thought, so they have to get a ring pop. And they realize that, especially in today's market, houses cost a little bit, so they have to get a cardboard box and throw together the best they can. And for a car, I got a little Tights car. I assume that'll work. And then when they get to the end of it and try to get the moon, they realize they've already blown the budget, so all they can get is a burnout light bulb. So since vendors are like teenage boys and they're long on promises and short on results, what can we do to protect ourselves? So what I would suggest is we try to take the right steps, and that's what we're going to talk about just for a couple of minutes, is what the steps we can take to try to make sure that we, as we onboard vendors, as we hire vendors, as we onboard products into our companies, how do we try to make sure we're getting products and vendors that are actually good and not crap? So where do we start? We need a product. We need to buy maybe a vulnerability scanner, maybe an EDR product, maybe a SIEM. We need to buy a product. So where do we start? What's the best first thing for us to do? Do we just immediately hop in and search and do Google searches and just find every vendor we can to meet the need we think we have? Do we jump in and just meet with vendors and just start taking vendor calls? Because I know for most of us, vendors are emailing us all the time wanting meetings. So it's really easy to get vendor meetings. All you have to do for some companies is say their names 3 times and a salesman will appear. So is that the best thing to do? Just jump in and take off? In my opinion, I'm going to say no. Whenever we need a product, we need to find a vendor. I think the best first thing we can do is step back. What do we do when we step back? Well, I would say what we do when we step back is, number one, we breathe. Working in enterprise information security, we're always in a rush. There's always lots to do. And it's always in the back of our mind, we have to get this done because we don't want to suffer a breach. We don't want to be popped. And so we're constantly doing and going and doing. And sometimes, especially when we're onboarding vendors, we just need to step back. And the first thing we need to do is just breathe and say, okay, let's get our thoughts together. Let's think about what we're doing. Let's not make any rash decisions. So after we breathe, let's ask the question, what is the problem? What problem am I trying to solve? Too many times I've seen people rush into buying a product and they're just trying to buy something and they don't even know what problem they're trying to fix. They don't even know what they're trying to do. So the first thing I need to do is make a good list of what do I want out of a product, or what do I think I want out of a product. And as I go through these steps, maybe I realize what I thought I wanted isn't really what I need. But at least if I start with what do I want, that gives me a good starting point. So as I'm looking at products and vendors, I can start to have this idea of what I want. Because if you don't know what you want, you can be sold anything. And as I build out and try to answer that question, what problem am I trying to solve? I define my needs. I figure out what I really need, what will work, what won't work. So after we define our needs, what do we do next? Well, that's when we're going to start reviewing vendors and looking at all the vendors that are out there. And depending on what kind of product line you're looking at, there's a lot of vendors out there. So if you talk about email security, there's a billion vendors out there. You talk about security awareness, there's a quadrillion vendors out there. You talk about EDRs, whatever. There are lots and lots of vendors out there, and every single one of them would be glad to sell you a product. So what we need to do is, at least initially, start ruling vendors out and start figuring out what vendors aren't going to work for us. And let me say this, as we're starting to review vendors, just because a vendor is a market leader doesn't mean the product is good. I looked at one email security product in particular, took the call with them. They showed me and my boss the product, and they were just, oozing about how great they thought the product was. And the whole time I am thinking, holy crap. We got off the call with the vendor and they're just like, yeah, when you're ready to buy, because we know our product's great, we're a market leader. When you're ready to buy, just call us. We get off the call with the vendor. I look at my boss on another call and I tell him these words: if you buy that product, I quit. So don't get the idea, well, there's a market leader. That means it's fantastic. It may be a market leader, but it can still suck. As we're reviewing vendors, don't be afraid to ask friends and colleagues. Everybody has an opinion. It may be right or wrong, but as you're reviewing vendors, don't be afraid to ask people. If you have Twitter, Mastodon, whatever, ask people on there, hey, what do you think of this product? What's your experience with it? If you're at a conference and you're talking to somebody, you make a friend, ask them, hey, what do you guys use for EDR? What do you think about it? If they're talking about a product they're using, ask them what they think about it if you're looking at that product. Don't be afraid to talk to people, because there are a lot of us that have good, bad, and ugly experiences with certain products, and we're happy to talk about that. That way other people can learn from what we've been through. Because I would much rather, if I had a crap experience with a product, I would much rather you learn from what I've seen than you have to go through a crap experience too. So we review it. We need to review websites and white papers, YouTube blogs. There's a lot of resources out there that we can learn about products, and that's what we should do as we're reviewing vendors. We should study the product and learn about it. We need to really, at this point, beware of buzzword bingo. This has been talked a lot about today, so I'm not going to hit this super hard. but we all know that salesmen and marketing material love to freaking put buzzwords out there like we're all about digital transformation of endpoint, blah, blah, blah. And it's just crap. That's all it is. So we need to be aware of that and just realize when we're being fed buzzwords. And there are lots of times you can get on a website and you can read a sentence and it's like a marshmallow. There's a lot there, but it's nothing of sustenance. So if we're reviewing vendors, we need to remember too, not to get enamored. What I mean by that is don't fall in love with a vendor or a product. I've seen too many people who have died on the heel of, we're only going to use this vendor. And unfortunately, I've seen people lose their jobs because of this, because they said, oh, I'll only ever use this vendor for this thing. And companies have ended up saying, well, if you're not going to use another vendor, if you're not going to work on another product, see you, we'll get somebody else who will. The way I like to put and think about this is we need to view our vendors and our products we use, our tools, as livestock, not pets. These are things that are ultimately, the other way I'd put it, they're tools, not collectibles. We're not hanging all these different products and vendors up on a wall and enjoying them like I do my badges in the background. Our products shouldn't be things that gather dust. They should be things we use. And if they're not being used, they're just shelfware and they're useless to us. So I need to realize that every vendor I have is a tool in my tool belt. And I don't need to just be enamored with it. If it's a good product, great, we'll use it. If not, let's get rid of it. Let's find something that works. Ultimately, the way I term this is we need to be vendor agnostic. I need a tool to do a job. Lots of vendors can do lots of different jobs. Doesn't really matter the vendor as long as it can get the job done and meet the needs we have within our environment. So as we continue reviewing vendors, this means that eventually we're going to have to meet with vendors. We're going to have to get product demos. We're going to have to get demonstrations. And as we meet with vendors, we need to keep some things in mind. Number one, it is a vendor's job to sell us a product. Most of us have had that friend in our 20s that you'll go out to a restaurant or they'll go to a grocery store somewhere and there'll be a pretty lady that's working as a hostess or a waitress or working at a counter at a convenience store. And that person will be nice to our friend. And what does our friend tell us? Oh, I think they like me. Dude, she's just doing her job. Stop being a creep. We do the same thing with vendors. Sometimes vendors are nice to us and we forget they're trying to sell us a product. They may or may not like us. They're probably not our friend, but what they definitely are trying to do, they're trying to sell us a product because that's how they make a living. So we need to be careful and realize that and be careful to not be sold. We want to buy a product, but we don't want to be a sucker. What we also need to do is we're meeting with vendors. We need to study before we meet. I'm a big advocate of studying before we meet with a vendor. I know too many people that jump on calls with vendors and know nothing. They meet with vendors that they know nothing about their product. Not a fan of that at all. When I meet with a vendor, I should have a pretty good idea of what that product does and how it works. Because if I don't, that is when I'm going to get sold snake oil, is because I have no clue what the product does. And they can tell me it's AI driven and it will do everything you ever wanted and it will solve all the problems in your environment. And you know what? If I've not studied, I may believe it. What else do I need to do? I need to ask questions. I need to ask dumb questions. I need to ask hard questions. But mainly, I need to ask questions. Why? Because questions are going to help me figure out if this vendor is a good candidate. And one of the biggest things I need to do when I'm doing a vendor review is I need to not rush. Again, and I said this once, and I'll say it again, we need to slow down. And instead of trying to rush in and say, great, we'll buy the product. You need to slow down and not rush. As I'm doing vendor reviews, I like to have good examples of things when I do talks. So as I'm doing vendor reviews, I thought about what are some questions I could ask. And here are some questions that I thought of and questions that I've asked as I do vendor reviews. Questions like, what makes your product different from competitors? Pretty good question to ask. Say, what makes yours different? There's 1,000 email security products. What makes yours different? What are the strengths of your product? Now, if you ask a vendor what are the weaknesses of your products, you're probably going to hit a brick wall and they're probably going to get offended for some reason. So I wouldn't say ask a vendor what are the weaknesses of your problems, but ask questions that reveal weaknesses. So if you're dealing with an EDR product or reviewing an EDR product, ask questions with what does memory consumption of your agent look like on an endpoint? Ask questions like, what's your average response time? So like, ask questions that can reveal weaknesses in a product. Ask a question like, what's your roadmap look like? This question is really important for me because I don't want to buy a product that isn't actively being invested in. I want to see a product that has a good roadmap and has a good future, because if I'm investing in a product, I want the company that's selling me that product to also invest in it. Another important question, how does pricing work? None of us probably have unlimited budgets. So we need to know how pricing works. Another important thing that goes along with this, how does licensing work? How can I report a vulnerability? Do you have a letter of attestation or a pen test report you can share with me? These last two are really important for me because even as security professionals, we're reviewing security products, but it's still important with those products to make sure those companies have good security and they're not doing things like, not sanitizing HAR files on their customer support websites or, things like that. I don't know what I'm talking about with that, but, we need to vet as we're asking these questions, what the vendors are doing and try to get a good, what we're doing is investigation to make sure this is a vendor we want to do business with and we're not wasting our time. So we've defined our needs. We've reviewed vendors. Now what we should have after we've reviewed vendors is we should be able to get a short list. And what I mean by a short list is a list of vendors who we think can meet our needs. How do we get from a short list to our pick of a vendor though? So we've reviewed vendors and we've got this list of vendors we think that are going to work for us. So how do I get my pick of the vendor I want to use? Well, the best way to do that has already been talked about today. We want to do a proof of concept. So in other words, we want to test the tool. Now, this may seem like a no-brainer. Of course, if we're going to review a vendor and want to understand and assess a tool, Jonathan, we're going to do a proof of concept. That's a no-duh. But I've seen a lot of companies skip that, and we don't ever want to do that. We want to make sure that we're doing a proof of concept because a proof of concept is going to be where we find out how good a tool is. What if a vendor wants to skip a POC? What if we're talking to a vendor and a vendor says, yeah, you don't need a POC. Our product's great. Let me just say, if a vendor tells you to skip the POC, red flag, red flag, red flag, red flag, red flag. And if I didn't say it enough, that is a freaking red flag. And any vendor that would tell you to skip a POC, tell them, well, see you later, kick rocks, have a nice day. Vendors should want us to want our hands on the product. They should want us to try the product out. If I have a product that I think is great, test it. Put it through the ringer. See how it is. And if a vendor doesn't want me to do that, as I said, red flag. Another way to really think of a proof of concept is think of it as we're efficacy testing. That was hard to say for some reason. We are trying to test how a product does. What we're ultimately trying to do is we're trying to see if the product can cash the check that the salesman's mouth has wrote. Salesmen make all, as we said, salesmen and vendors make all these promises, but in a POC, we're going to find out if those promises can actually be met. The point isn't necessarily of a POC to prove that a product sucks. Now, we may do that in a POC, but that's not really the point of it. What we're really trying to prove is the product useful in our environment? Because there may be a product that works for our friends in another company, but it may not work in our environment because of the things we've got going on. So with a POC, we're trying to prove how useful is that product. And during that POC, what we should do is hammer that product. I mean, we should throw the strangest things we can at it and see how it runs. If we're testing EDR, let's hammer the thing. Let's throw different scenarios at it. Let's use things like atomic red team, and let's just hammer, jackhammer, and see how it performs. If we're trying an email security product, let's integrate that with our email provider, and let's see how it performs. Let's do phishing tests. Let's send fake phishing emails and see how it does. And here's the question. What if we don't do a POC? What's the risk we run if we don't do a POC? Well, the risk is the product won't work as it was promised. And then what happens is you waste time, you waste money. Then ultimately you're going to look foolish because you put your vote on this product. You've told your leadership this product is going to work, and then it didn't, and you look foolish. And then the last thing that's going to happen is you cry and you have a broken heart. So just got a few minutes left, but I can't stress enough. When we're testing products, we need to be sure to make sure that the product works as advertised, to make sure that things are going as planned with that tool. Because a vendor can say anything they want. Any of us can say anything we want, but can we back up our claims with real utility? That's the question. So we found our needs. We then reviewed vendors. We've done a proof of concept. What do we have to do next? We do a proof of concept. We find our pick. We find the tool we want to use. We now should be able to make our pick. And then what we have to do is we have to negotiate. We have to buy the product. And I don't want to say much about negotiation. That's not what this talk is about, but I do want to say a few things about negotiating terms of a contract with a product. Don't be afraid to negotiate. Vendors can give a price. Don't be afraid to try to haggle that price down. Don't be afraid to say, we can't pay that. What's the worst that can happen? They say, okay, we can't do any better. Okay, cool. But don't be afraid to negotiate with a vendor. Also, don't be afraid to call out bullcrap licensing practices. What I mean by that is there are some features in 2023 that should be table stakes, in my opinion. A good example of that is SSO. And if you want to know how some of the shady things people are doing around SSO, go to sso.tax. There's a whole thing. You can spend a lot of time there seeing some shady crap around SSO. If a company's doing something that's shady with licensing and that just doesn't feel right, don't be afraid to be like, hey, this licensing doesn't work for me. Example, in story time, I had a vendor that with SSO, we were using the product and we were paying around $2,000 for the product. And I said, hey, I want SSO for my 30 people that use this product because we're trying to implement SSO with as many products as we can. And the vendor came back and they said, sure, we have SSO. We'll sell it to you, but you have to get our enterprise super solution. And I said, okay, cool. How much is it going to be? And they said, it'll be 50 grand. Wait a minute. I'm paying 2,000 and now you want me to pay 50,000 just for this one feature? Yeah, but you get all kinds of other features, Jonathan. Yeah, but I just want the one. And then I went back to the vendor and we talked a little bit and I let them know, hey, this, in my opinion, is table stakes. And then we haggled a little bit more and went on with the story, but don't be afraid to tell a vendor, hey, this doesn't work for me. I think this isn't right. Now, you don't have to be a jerk about it. But you can also tell a vendor, hey, the way you do licensing doesn't work for me. Don't be afraid to call that out. And ultimately in negotiations, don't be afraid to walk away. This is why we have a short list. We should have a number 2 pick. And if the number 1 didn't work out for whatever reason, maybe they cost too much, we couldn't negotiate it lower. Maybe the licensing and the way they did licensing didn't work for us. Maybe there's something else that popped up. We can always fall back on our number 2. So don't be afraid at any time when you're negotiating to tell the vendor, see you later, have a nice day. What we also have to realize is once we've onboarded that vendor, We've negotiated the contract. We've now put the product in our environment. We're in production with this thing. Our work's over, right? No, it's not. We still have to deal with the vendor most of the time, unless we're dealing with a product that's perpetually licensed and we just run it forever, don't ever have to talk to the vendor for anything again. But that's probably not the case. We probably have to deal with the vendor. And there's some things that I would advise you to remember after you onboard the product. And what I'd remind you of is you're paying the vendor money. Don't be afraid to ask for support, and don't be too proud to ask for help. I've seen people who have support terms in a contract with a vendor, and you'll ask them, well, are you going to ask the vendor to help you with this problem? They'll say, no, I'm going to figure it out. Why? And the line I use, and people often will say it before I do now, the line I use all the time is, we pay them money. If I pay them money for support, I shouldn't have to figure out the problem. That's what I am paying them for. So I shouldn't be too proud or too afraid to ask them for help, because that's why we bought the product. That's why we've paid for support. Also, don't be afraid to ask for improvements. I have an email security vendor I use who I have a really good relationship with. I've asked them, hey, I think it would be really good if you could do this. You know what they've done? They've done it. That is how vendors keep earning our money. Yeah, we bought the initial contract. Yeah, we went with them this time, but that doesn't mean the next time we have to renew that we'll automatically go with them. The way you're going to keep me buying your products year after year is by continually improving. And if I run into something that I want to see improved, if you improve that, if you do what I suggest, that's going to make me say, man, this company's listening to me. They care about my business. I want to do business with this company. Thing I have to remember too is no product's perfect. Sometimes they're going to frustrate me. Sometimes they're going to be a pain in the butt. And sometimes I need to balance that and realize, because there may be a perfect product out there. But my advice to you is, if there is a perfect product out there, don't use it. You'll screw it up. Now, as we're navigating our relationship with a vendor, when do you walk away? It takes a lot of work to onboard vendors. So when do I say, see you to a vendor? And here's the thing. Some vendors only pay attention to moving feet, and we need to vote with our feet and our money sometimes. So when should I leave a vendor? When my complaints aren't being heard, and when improvements aren't being made, when my issues aren't being resolved. I've raised a ticket for something and they won't fix it. See ya. If there's problems in that vendor, and what I mean by this is a vague remark. What I mean by that is, if there's moral, ethical problems, if there's big security problems we know about, maybe it's time to tell that vendor to kick rocks and we go somewhere else. And sometimes maybe a different product just makes more sense. We went with one ER product several years ago, and it worked really well at the time. But when it was time to review that vendor again and renew our contract, we said, you know what? They're not the one that makes the most sense. There are other products that do a better job. So sometimes, no bad on the vendor, there's just other products that are beating them, and that's a part of life. So recap, really, I would tell you there's 4 stages of dealing with vendors. We determine our needs, we review vendors, we understand, assess the vendor's products, and we navigate our relationship. Jason told us the other day in a meeting we had about this webinar to give people a burning thought. What would I want people to remember from this talk? So I thought long and hard about what I want you to remember. When it comes to dealing with vendors, I would say it's like buying 1-ply toilet paper. Because sometimes people think, well, I'll buy 1-ply toilet paper. It's a good idea. It's cheap. It'll be okay. Number 1, you should love yourself more than dealing with poor quality. Number 2, you shouldn't punish yourself. Number 3, you may be poor, but you're not that poor. And number 4, it sounds like a good idea, but it isn't. So the same is true of vendors. Love yourself more than dealing with certain vendors. Don't punish yourself. You're not that poor. There are free and open source tools that beat some paid for tools. And some tools sound like a good idea, but they're not. Thank you, everyone. If you like the talk today, you can connect with me on Twitter, Discord, JRods404. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Deb.
What a wonderful way to close out your talk. I was giggling in the backstage through that entire thing. That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Guys, if you want to go head on over to the other talk, I think Sean Goodwin is about to start in about a minute. And thank you for joining us, and we'll see you over on the next track.